Welcome to Fostering Parenthood. Consent, porn,
normal relationship,
being a teen mom,
my first real adult love,
what it's like to be a foster child.
Every person I had an attachment with had left.
How trauma impacts your decision making.
I didn't feel very accepted and I didn't feel very safe.
And he said, you are lowering your own value by putting up with this.
But I wish someone was there to be there and tell me that it wasn't okay.
How do I honor providing that space for them?
It's about being in a place to be open to someone sharing with you their hurts.
Making sure that you guys are going into things open and supportive, or just even willing, right, to have these conversations.
I need you to find the strength to call someone and say, I'm drowning right now.
It's helpful to know yourself first as a caregiver.
But I just want caregivers to know that you're not alone.
You called me mom. Hello and welcome to an exciting episode of Fostering Parenthood, the podcast where we delve into the multifaceted world of foster care and parenting. In today's episode, we'll uncover the importance of connecting Indigenous youth in foster care to their rich cultural heritage and how doing so can significantly impact their healthy sexual development. As studies have revealed, fostering strong cultural connections in Indigenous youth can lead to better sexual health outcomes and empower them to make them feel informed with decisions about their own sexual well-being. Join us as we listen to a real-life story from a former foster youth who shares her journey of discovering her Indigenous heritage and how this knowledge could have played a crucial role during her pregnancy. Welcome to Fostering Parenthood, and let's dive into today's inspiring story. Hey, Tamar.
Hi, how are you?
I am great. Thanks so much for coming back on season 2. I remember season 1 and, we're still kind of just starting out. And I was so excited to see that you were coming back today. Could you share with folks that perhaps didn't hear maybe your background on season 1 and just kind of bring them up to speed?
Yeah, of course, Dorothy. I'm so happy to be here for season 2. So glad to be a guest again. So just for the audience to know, so I'm Tamar. I am a former foster youth. I also had my son when I was 15. I'm currently studying at San Diego State University and working in the film industry, and very happy to advocate for those who share the similar backgrounds as I. It's something I'm passionate about, and there's just a lot of stories to be told, and I'm very happy to be a guest and be able to share my experience to help other youth.
Well, congratulations on, getting your education and continuing. I don't even like to think about the percentage of foster youth that have gone on to college. It's not a huge number, and, thanks for persevering and getting that done. And what are you studying?
I'm studying communications and public relations. So I'm in the media college right now, and I absolutely love it. Talking is definitely my selling point, which is why I love podcasting. So
well, you're a good talker. Now you have a great voice for podcasts. I wish I did. I feel like I have this kind of squeaky thing going, but I don't know. I'm old, so I'm gonna use that one. Well, one of the things I think is important that we start to talk about is Indigenous youth. What does that mean? What does Indigenous youth mean?
Yeah, from my experience being an Indigenous youth, I think it's a very difficult conversation because on the one side of things, it's where your ethnicity lies, where your parents came from. But on the other hand, it's also a lot of culture and a lot of traditions. And being in foster care, you might not have access to knowing where you come from. And I believe that a huge part of what makes up each person's individual story is having that background and finding their own story from where they came from and either using that to persevere or continue on. And I think it's really difficult, especially now in this day and time with so many youth in care. And the number of Indigenous youth is dropping, and it leaves a lack of community for those who want to find culture and where they come from.
I think it's such a big part of us. I mean, I wish I had that I mean, I know kind of where my ancestors came from, but I had my parents at home. I could say, hey, where did grandma come from? Who lived where when? And foster youth, as you said, there's such a gap, right? Who's my mom? Who's my dad? And even if you know them, are they even aware of where their parents were? And I think when we start looking at our identity, who am I? What holidays are important, nature, right? Indigenous youth, and just this connection with nature and culture of such a strong spirituality. And you were sharing earlier something about a percentage. Can you share with me those percentages at your college?
Yeah, so for me, studying communications and cultures, I've learned a lot about Indigenous youth and people on campuses, and it really motivated me to check statistics when I went to college. I'm personally multiracial, so for me, I've always struggled with finding what community I identify with and
Mhm.
understanding like you can be a part of multiple. And I really
Mhm.
wanted to go to a campus where I felt heard and seen. And most campuses, to my surprise, it's less than 1% of
Wow.
Indigenous youth are enrolled. My
Mhm.
campus is huge in advocating for Indigenous youth. We're the Aztecs and we're on Kume land. So theirs, it's a little higher. I believe it's about 3%, which is still a very low number than what it
Mhm.
should be,
Mhm.
which, brings me to say how it's so hard, especially when you don't know other people that are Indigenous. And you hear a lot of people say, I feel like in community and on campus, oh, like, my great grandma was Cherokee, or not to shame anyone for that, but I think it's a little different, and it's a huge part of who you are than like your great, great, great ancestor. Having that direct lineage does impact like the way you look, what you believe in religiously, yeah, what
Mhm.
traditions, like you mentioned.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's really important for youth to have those ties and have them choose whether they want to continue with those traditions or not for their own future families.
How do people find out? I mean, if you've got a kiddo in your home, right? You're a caregiver and you're really trying to help this child. I know two of my kids asked for one of those DNA kits for Christmas.
Yes.
So I'm like, spit in a tube, man, we'll find out. So do you have any other thoughts on how does somebody find out if they have a lineage?
Yeah, so I'm personally part of two programs. One is called Ready to Succeed, which helps career development for former foster youth. And I'm also
Mhm.
part of a national program called Emma Bowen Foundation, which helps people of color, whether you're African American, you're Indigenous, it really doesn't matter, and they basically help tie you with networking as well and career development. But on the other hand of things, they help tie you to your culture. And the reason why I'm really proud to be a part of them is the mentors there have helped given me resources, to finding out where I come from. Because I've shared with them, I don't know, like, everything that I should know. I know what tribe, my grandma was on, but I don't really understand the extent of things. And they've connected me with
Mm.
resources like ACES, it's AISES, and they provide a ton of opportunities for Indigenous youth and things from scholarships, to
Mm.
mentorship, to career development, to education. And you can also get connected with your tribal ancestry, like on the reservation systems. And I know a lot of that can help with providing like scholarships and access to a community and finding out, how you can get involved with them. And it's been a really helpful resource, as well as I think looking into the organizations if you're a student on your campus
Mm.
or if you're helping a transition age student, helping them transition to those programs when they finish high school if they're older, and if they
Mhm.
want to go to college, there's a lot of programs on my campus that help you as well if you're a Native American. And I think those are really amazing too, to help those older students find their roots.
You had said something about you picked San Diego State, right? Because it's on a reservation and they're called the Aztecs, right? So part of maybe what a caregiver could help do is drive a child or a youth in their care toward kind of a good fit, not just
Yes.
any college, but one that can meet their needs, not just academically, but also culturally.
100%. I think that's a huge factor too in finding your community on a campus. I've had a hard time finding mine. It's my
Yeah,
first year here.
Sure.
And I feel like having a caregiver provide that smooth transition will help
Mhm.
you as a foster youth adapt better and have the same opportunity as everyone else.
Absolutely. Another part of this is, just kind of a background on health, right? Certain cultures have, certain ethnic groups have certain illnesses that kind of run right in their family, and I would think it would be really important. And you're a mom, right?
Yeah.
How old's your child now?
He actually just turned 6 about 2 weeks ago.
Stop it. That's
Yes.
awesome. Oh,
Yes.
that's awesome. So you were saying something, again, when we were talking privately about having an operation right after you gave birth,
Yeah.
and can you tell me about that? What exactly, why was that a surprise to everyone?
Yeah, so I gave birth when I was 15, right before turning 16, and obviously that's a whole other conversation. So my
Sure.
healthcare already was just, tarnished. And for me, I don't know my family's history, my medical files. I ended up being raised by my dad. He was a single dad. And, he has struggled to even afford his own healthcare, as a grown adult.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
he doesn't know either. And I was always
Yeah.
struggling, like, what am I supposed to do? And I had Medi-Cal and they helped cover the cost, but they didn't provide any resources to understanding my own health. And I feel like the
Mm.
healthcare system really has that push on medications, and not doing natural remedies and really fixing the
Mm.
root, which is also something I learned is really huge in Indigenous communities, like using those natural and herbal remedies versus just a pill that you pop. And for me, I was just doing what the doctor said, showing up to my appointments. And I had a lot of health issues after my birth and during. It was a really traumatic experience. And about, I'd say, 3 weeks after I gave birth, on my 16th birthday, I had to have an emergency surgery to get rid of my gallbladder because I had jaundice and my skin turned yellow, my eyes turned yellow,
Happy birthday,
you know?
girl.
And
Dang.
I had a 3 week old, at home,
Ah,
and it was just not a sweet 16 for me, but it
oh,
was really
man.
traumatic, and I think it was honestly in some ways worse than the birth. And this is like not having a gallbladder. It's typically it could be if you're overweight, or you're not eating right, but a huge factor too is actually for Indigenous people and people of color. And I did not know that. And there's a bunch of scientific evidence backing it, but essentially, if you come from one of those ethnicities and backgrounds, you're actually at a higher risk for developing gallstones when you're pregnant. And there's ways to mitigate that if your doctor knows your background and history. And, I ate really healthy. I was really thin even during pregnancy. And there was no reason why I should have, had to lose an organ an organ so young. And it's pretty crazy too. I connected with a couple other like young moms, that actually also are people of color, and they had the same experience as I did. And I started
Wow.
doing my research from there, which is where I found this information. So that's just one example, and I think it really goes to say, like, I've had chronic, health issues since then with digestion and my eating and my weight, and it's really impacted my daily life. And I wish that someone would have, been there to advocate for me and do the research and help me find my medical history so that a doctor or healthcare provider could have changed that outcome for my little gallbladder, who's now in a
Your poor
landfill.
little gallbladder. It lasted 16 years, though.
It did, it did. It did.
It
She held
your
in,
g
she held in.
Oh my gosh, your gallbladder and its little rocks had to go somewhere.
Yes.
Oh,
Lots of rocks, I saw them.
I'm so sorry. Well, you bring up a really good point, though. We're talking about Indigenous youth, um, and Western medicine often doesn't link itself very well with Indigenous, population and reservation medicine. And even though there's a balance, had you been able to access your history, uh, find out more about mom, right? And what she went through, perhaps maybe she doesn't have a gallbladder and
She actually
rocks.
had the same experience. I
There
ended
it
up
is.
asking my dad, and he said, "Oh, like, he didn't know at the time." But he's like, "Oh, wait, she went through that." And I was like, so
Yeah.
someone would have
Would
told
have been
me.
nice. Yeah, would have been nice. So, hindsight, right? 2020. So I think it just brings a really good point in that we need to know our history. We need to know our medical history. We need to know our background so that we know what we're at risk for culturally, ethnically, because certain individuals are higher risk for certain things. And had you know that, you at least would have been mentally prepared, if nothing else, instead of spending your 16th birthday yellow. And I and I think that the idea of it, Indigenous youth being able to access, a medicine man on the reservation, and how comfortable a person would feel if that is part of their culture, and really, really good points. How do you think being an Indigenous youth, finding out your mom's background and that you are Indigenous, how does that affect your reproductive health? The view of it, how you kind of approach your healthy sexual development.
Yeah, so I think a huge issue for me is I just didn't have access to healthy sexual development, which is why I also got pregnant so young. And it was really hard, I think, not having a mother around to guide me, before that happened and, during and after. All I know is she also experienced a lot of hard things in her birth, and I did as well. And I think that being Indigenous did tie into her experience. I know that she didn't get an epidural. I never knew why, and I didn't really understand that there are options besides just being at a regular hospital. And you can have this westernized view of, for example, childbirth, but you can kind of mesh them, like there's other options like having a midwife and having a caregiver and having like a water birth, and you can still tie to your ancestral roots, but also, you know, do it whatever way you want. And for me, I was just young and I didn't know that there was other options out there. And my experience was so traumatic. I wish I would have known. So I could have, tried something that like my grandma and my great grandma did, maybe that I didn't know about. And I feel like having someone to advocate for me would have been really beneficial looking back now at 21.
Well, I think it empowers you, right? When you know what your ancestors have done and what you're capable of doing, and yet you didn't even know that that was an option. So I think that knowing as much as you can about women in your history, the culture of your history, is empowering.
100%. And, like we also talked about, like healthcare, that also translates to reproductive rights. And, there's so much to dive in there, but I feel like things such as like birth control, which weren't always around, until really recently, and having abortion access and all that, that's going to look different for someone that has these roots. And for me, I always felt lost. I always felt like I didn't have anything to tie to and I was just winging it, and I wish that I did have something to tie it to and have that resilience and strength and feel empowered by it. Because I remember when I gave birth, I felt anything but empowered. And learning in school, I always learned about just how empowered, like my ancestors were. And I never felt like that because I didn't know any better. So I think that providing these resources to youth when they're young, before these things happen, they'll make choices that align with their values and their morals and their history, and create, a legacy that we even have today.
I think I'm hearing you say, here you're 15, pregnant, scared, and really adopting whatever the folks around you are telling you that this is who you are and what you're going to do, as opposed almost to floating, right? Like,
Yes.
wow, I don't know where I'm going, and learning about your culture, learning about who you are and who your ancestors are, grounded you. It anchored you. And now at 21 compared to 15, you're anchored. You don't only know what you're doing today, but it's based on what your ancestors and the empowerment and the strength that they were able to provide you over generations. And what a great place, what a great foundation for any woman, especially when we're talking about birth, to stand on.
Yeah, 100%. And even for me too, like thinking about it now, I always felt like, especially when it comes to repro, I never felt seen, or comfortable. And I grew up around a lot of religious people and shoving like their own religions and where they came from. And I never really knew a lot of first gen immigrants either. And my grandparents too, on my dad's side, like they came here from Europe and like, direct lineage, like I knew them and they were alive during World War II. And that was really crazy to me because growing up, I never felt like I even had roots there. And knowing that like I actually am from this land, like it does kind of change things like once you have that perspective. And I wish that I had those supporters with me. And especially because there's, people have been giving birth at a younger age for a long time. And, those communities don't always judge you like the way a Western community does. And I feel like I would have had more emotional and just family support too if I would have been tied with my background. So it leads to, in the long run, stronger family ties as well, just from simple access.
Which is why it's so important for our caregivers to help these youth and children find out how to anchor themselves. They're not going to just find out, they're just going to be lost unless we advocate and help in as many creative ways as we can, whether it's contacting local reservations, whether it's spitting in a tube, whatever that looks like, but really helping to ground our youth more appropriately, and not just looking at today, but looking at yesterday.
100%. I agree with you.
I'm wondering as we talk, if we could come up with 3 tools between the two of us that we can offer to caregivers in helping the youth in their home find out who they are, find out what their lineage looks like, and help guide them as best as they can to help bring that I don't know, that fullness, right? Of who am I really?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it goes to the caregiver, but also on a larger scale and having caregivers advocate for these things. I think a huge one is a lot of foster youth are on like programs like Medi-Cal. I think having them offer services like holistic medicine. For me, that's something I've looked into, but it's like $700-800 for an hour consultation. So I just haven't been able to do that yet. But I think that advocating, like just the system in general and saying like we need to provide these options for religious, cultural, and health benefits and have those proven statistics and those case studies, to show how it is beneficial and working on that. I think that's a huge one. So like the medical system, which then can provide youth with the option whether they want westernized medicine or not, and maybe prevent illness and disease. A second one that could help, I think, is with tying youth to their background, especially for transition aged youth, is providing an optional like DNA test, like asking them, are you comfortable with this? Do you want to find more? Because for legal reasons, they may not always be able to find their parents, but they can at least, find where they come from. And a lot of DNA tests around now can actually help locate family in other states and other countries, and sometimes even provide contact information if your family has done the same test as you. So I think that's a good way to not only helping them find their background, but also maybe connecting them with family members that they didn't know they had. And I'd say a third tool that could be useful is also, like we talked about, building that community for them as they're going into education, having those programs, those Indigenous centers, and having things like ACES, researching the scholarships, the community building, the mentorship, which is not only going to boost the friends that they make and the mentors they have in their life, but that can also lead to career opportunities and have them have equal access when they graduate and not feel lost, and help them find their own community.
I love that, because don't we all search for kind of who we are? What are our roots? What am I? What am I made of? What did my ancestors have to do to make it possible for me to be here today? And I think that really just builds this sense of confidence, right? Of kind of this identity that we didn't know we had. Those are great tools. And I think that, as we kind of talk about this really important topic, but one that's not often talked about because of that 1% or 3%. I'm sorry, but this is a very important topic for that 1% and 3%. And being able to connect them with clubs and any sort of support toward finding out more about the richness of their culture and their family is it goes without saying. I think it's far more important than we give credit to.
100%. And for me, like I mentioned, I am multiracial. I'm a lot of different things, but the majority of where I come from is, being Native American and also being Persian, and then my dad's
Mhm.
European. And I think it's also important, like for me, I may have not aged out of the system, but just how it was being raised with my dad's side of the family, and they're all very white, blonde hair, blue eyes, and then, I look like my mom because she's Persian and Native American. And,
Mm.
like I never felt like I connected with them. No one was there to talk to these things with me. And I always felt kind of silly, like, oh, like, should I have this question? Should I be asking myself that? And I think that if I had this support system, especially too, like while I was being placed back in care with my father, like if there were these groups that I could, be a part of that my
Mhm.
caseworker could have connected me with, I think that would have really helped my identity crisis, when I was transitioning there as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Tamar, for being here and just sharing your lived experience. It's always a pleasure to, I don't know, just take off the protective wear that we kind of wear with the world and be able to just share what we feel is really important. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for making me feel seen. It's been a constant journey for me, especially now being a mom and wanting my son to know his roots too.
Absolutely. I'm excited for your son because he has an advantage that he has such a great mom.
He doesn't always think so, but I appreciate you saying it.
Put him
Thank
on,
you.
I'll tell him. All right, take care.
Yes. Take care.